All right, welcome back, everyone. I heard that the volume was a little low, so I will do my best to speak up. Is it a little better now? Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Excellent. Good. All right. Well, if you are just arriving and you missed the intro, as Marcia said, my name is Mei Elliot, and I'm speaking to you from San Francisco Zen Center. This is the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. So as Buddhist practice is a practice of freedom, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement just in the spirit of creating equity and freedom for all people. So as one of my teachers says, if you want to be free, study where you get stuck. And as you now know, I live and work at San Francisco Zen Center. And many of the conversations I have with students are about decision making. I counsel a lot of young people, and it seems like there's so much paralyzing indecision for folks these days. And of course, it doesn't stop with young people. We need to make decisions throughout the years. And choices continue to present themselves, and we need to respond. Do we choose to stay in a relationship, or do we choose to leave it? Should I get surgery, or should I live with the pain? Do I speak up if someone hurts my feelings, or do I just try to let it go? Should I move? Should one move home? Should one move to live in an assisted living place, or stay at home? Strawberries for dessert or cake, right? So in US culture, often freedom is really associated with being able to make choices. And yet many of us feel really anxious when we're in the face of needing to make a choice. So if you want to be free, study where you get stuck. Whether small or great, decisions seem to be an area where people get really stuck. So that's what we'll be studying tonight. The topic for the evening is indecision and uncertainty. And specifically, we'll be looking at how to be free in the midst of uncertainty. So, how can we be less burdened, less contracted, less anxious when we really just don't know how to proceed? And then we'll also talk about how to actually make a decision, and hopefully a wise one, when the time is right. So I myself have really felt the burden of uncertainty in my own practice many times. I lived at Tassajara, as Marcia mentioned. I was there for a few years. And for those that are unfamiliar with Tassajara, in the summer months, it's open to the public for use of the hot springs there. But during the winter season, it shifts to being a cloistered monastery. So from September to April, it's closed to the public, and everyone wears black monastic robes, and we get up in the wee hours of the morning and sit. And, during these long winter months, there were many periods of peace, and there were also periods of planning. There were periods that I was sitting and trying to figure out what my future was. And I remember specifically sitting a practice period there, one of the 3-month ongos, these 3-month periods of study and sitting. And I remember trying to figure out when was the right time to move on from Tassajara. Even at that point, I was studying in the Vipassana tradition as well as the Zen tradition. And I was thinking of, do I go back and start sitting more at Spirit Rock? Do I stay here and do another practice period? The Clash was playing in my head. Should I stay? Should I go? And there's so much time thinking, weighing pros and cons, trying to control the future, trying to get what I wanted and avoid what I didn't want. And so at some point during this period of rumination, I went and saw the abiding teacher of Tassajara, Leslie James, and I explained the whole scenario and the pros and the cons and what I was thinking about. And really simply, she looked at me and she said, Mei, it sounds like you're afraid that you won't choose the right life. It sounds like you're afraid that you won't choose the right life. So often when we're faced with a difficult decision, it's almost as though we're afraid to choose the wrong life. And for me, the simplicity of that statement, of Leslie's statement, kind of disassembled what was at the heart of the problem. Like, there actually is no wrong or right life to choose. So small or large decisions can be a source of tremendous dis-ease. And there's different common patterns around indecision, and you may hear yourself in some of these. So I'll just share some of the common themes I've seen in ways that people react to decision making. So for some people, decisions tend to be very paralyzing, leading to procrastination, maybe neglecting what needs to be done, maybe using intoxicants to avoid it. It's a lower energetic state. And then for some people, needing to make difficult decisions can lead to compulsive planning, rehearsing, looping thoughts over and over, getting tied up in knots about making the perfect choice, and are often pained by anxiety of making the wrong choice. So that's more like an escalated energetic zone. So neither of these experiences tend to be ones of freedom, right? So how can we learn to be at ease? How can we learn to be free with the experience of uncertainty? So planning mind says, if I figure it out, then I'll be happy, right? If I can just figure out the answer, whether it's what to make for dinner or some big life decision, then I can relax, then I'll be happy. And as someone who's worked with planning mind, I've realized there's always going to be something that I don't know. I'll never, ever have it all figured out. There's not some blissful finish line where I'll never need to make another big life decision. There's going to be something new, from something tiny like where to go on vacation, to serious questions like to take a loved one off of life support. Right? So it would serve us well to become really fluent with how to be with uncertainty. And parting to learn to be at ease with this is learning to be happy before having the answer, right? Such that our happiness isn't contingent on the sureness of having decided on something. So rather than finding out the answer, can we learn to be at ease with the indecision itself? So this is what we might call not knowing practice or not knowing mind. So if you find yourself suffering in the throes of uncertainty, it's worth learning how to be at ease in this place. So to actually take it as your training to find a resting place, even while not knowing what to choose. So I want to read you a little part of a poem from Rainier Maria Rilke. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So learn to love the questions themselves. It's kind of like learning to love the flower while it's still a bud. We don't need to yank open the bud so that we can appreciate the flower. Can we just appreciate it in the bud phase? Let it open like a flower blooming. Rilke says, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. So how to learn to love the questions? Put another way, how can we learn to love the experience of having a question that we don't have an answer for? So our training, when we have a difficult decision to make, isn't necessarily in choosing the right life or making the perfect choice, but our training is in finding ease right there, right in that uncertain point. And here's the key piece of it. When in the midst of indecision, take refuge in the body. Oh, I just got another message that the volume's a little low. Is that a little better? How about now?
I think a little bit more, if possible.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, we're really having trouble hearing.
Oh, thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
Let me go into my audio settings and see if I can up them a bit. Did that make a difference?
So far,
Yeah, was that okay? Is this a little better?
it's better.
Okay.
Thank
great.
you.
Excellent. And was it Joyce that was having a hard time hearing? Is it better on your end also? Okay, great, excellent. I just found the setting that allows the mic volume to go up, so great. Thank you for telling me. All right, so as I was saying, when in the midst of uncertainty, the trick is taking refuge in the body, because the body is always in the present, right? This is what we do in our meditation. And the body, it can teach us how to be free. So I'll tell you a story about how I came to find freedom in the body while being in one of these states of uncertainty. So as we all know, getting married is a major life decision. And for me, when the right person came along, that decision was easy. But what wasn't easy was planning the wedding. These relatively minor decisions of the cake and the music and the dress and the caterer and all of those things. So shortly before my wedding, I sat a 2-month retreat at Spirit Rock. And these retreats are in silence and involve long hours of meditation. And every now and then I'd notice the mind snag and get caught spinning with decisions to make about wedding planning. Catering, dress, location. And of course, sitting on retreat is not the time to be making decisions. I wasn't going to call the caterer. I wasn't going to order a dress. So I just needed to sit and be with my uncertainty. So around that time, I went and saw Gil and talked to him about this repeating content that was coming up for me in my meditation. And he said, go to the factory. And I said, go to the factory. What do you mean? What are you talking about? And he said, go into the body. In the body, there are certain sensations that are happening, and it's almost as if those sensations are like a factory, and that factory is emitting these thoughts. And so rather than being kind of mesmerized by the off-gassing from the factory, by the smoke that's coming up into the mind, the thinking, but go back down to the factory and address the sensations at the source. So what I found was that when I went down to the factory, when I went into the body, there was a lot of tension and tightness there when I was in those thought loops. However, what I realized was I could meet that anxiety, those physical sensations, I could meet those sensations directly. Though this isn't what we typically think is happening, the planning mind, the one that kind of spins with pros and cons, it's typically trying to find an answer so that those physical sensations can go away, right? Because if we can have it figured out, then we can be at ease and those sensations won't plague us anymore. But by entering into the body and meeting the sensations directly, by going to the factory, I could sidestep the circuitous mental gymnastics of needing to find the answers. Instead, I could just meet the discomfort in the body directly, and learn to be with it without reactivity. And as I learn to be with the physical sensations with kindness and with patience rather than with anxious rumination, the factory began to run out of steam. And eventually, it didn't need to fill the mind with thinking anymore. I no longer needed to find the answer to my problem in order to be at ease. I could just be at ease with the physical sensations. Now, this is one of the reasons they say that meditation practice can, rather than solve our problems, it can dissolve our problems. So that's a practice for how to learn to be at ease with uncertainty. Let go of the narrative and enter into the body. Go down to the factory, feel into the experience, just being with the tightness, contraction, pressure, whatever. We can learn that we can be okay there, that it might be uncomfortable, but that we don't have to spend our life lost in future thinking. Because often our future thinking, our planning mind, our anxious rumination is just in response to that physical feeling. The anxiety and thinking is just a response to that unpleasant sensation in the body. So if we can turn and give our attention to the present moment experience, we're really addressing things at the source. It's the body sensations that are often churning out that mental content. So this is where more freedom can be found. If you find yourself struggling with a decision, just see if you can land more fully in the body. So with that said, I don't want it to sound like we should just get rid of thinking entirely. As part of learning to make decisions wisely, it's okay to use your cognitive mind to do this. In fact, we need to. I was once leading a retreat and someone asked, if this practice is all about being in the present moment, how do you plan what's for dinner or what clothes to wear to work? Well, one pays attention to the present moment and is present for the deciding. One is intentional about making the decision mindfully. So rather than ruminating while driving or while doing the dishes, if we have something to decide on, we do it completely. We stop what we're doing, we think about it. The thinking is in the present moment, and we're intentional. We can be deliberate about our planning rather than letting it run around in the background. Okay. So far, I've just really been talking about how to be at ease with indecision, with not having an answer. But now I'd like to pivot a bit and address the act of decision-making itself. That sometimes we actually do need an answer, and how does the Dharma help us find an answer? And ideally, we could learn how to do that wisely and compassionately. So now I'll offer some ways to help connect with our own inner guide, our own inner wisdom, to help us move through life's choices, great and small. So the first thing is learning to listen, learning to be mindful of our experience. So imagine for a moment that a ruler of a great country needs to make a decision, an important decision that will have far-reaching impacts on the people of her country. The appropriate course of action might be for the ruler to speak with her wise counselors, to hear from a variety of advisors, right? An advisor, one who might speak about the impact on the land, maybe another about the impact on the people, another advisor regarding the financial impact of the decision, etc. So in doing so, the ruler ensures that she has understood several viewpoints on the issue. That way she has really collected all of the data that she needs and she can make a good choice. So just like the ruler of a country, it would behoove each of us to consult our own inner wise counsel. And I'd like to propose that we all have this wise counsel within us, that each and every one of us actually has 3 wise advisors here with us to help make our choices, to help us make our choices. So one of our advisors is called the body. The second advisor is the heart, or the emotions. And the third advisor is the thinking mind. So I'd say that one of the reasons that we struggle with decision making is because for many of us, we only consult with one of our advisors. Some of us really lean heavily just on the thinking mind, only listening to logic and weighing pros and cons, and the mind gets tight and racing and doesn't really listen to the body or the heart. And for others, they might rely only on emotional experience and aren't very practical or thinking about finances or other things, right? And some might rely only on the third advisor, or no, excuse me, as I said, the first advisor, the body, right? Of just doing what the body craves. Another donut, more, a person who was experiencing just listening to the craving the body might have a hard time kicking unhealthy dietary habits, even though they have heart disease, or going on shopping sprees for the most beautiful fashions, even though they don't have the monetary capacity for that, or going on poorly considered sexual escapades. So we can see how, if we just let sense craving run the show, that doesn't work either. So the trick is letting all of them have a chance to speak, right? So without balanced input from all 3, we can find ourselves in some trouble. And while I just shared ways that the mind, the heart, and the body can get us into trouble, these parts can also really provide jewels of wisdom. So when we're having a hard time deciding on something, how can we learn to listen to all 3 of our advisors and to listen to the wisdom they have to share? Not the craving they have to share, but the wisdom they have to share. So I'll go through each of them now with some suggestions on how to mine the wisdom of each of our advisors. So starting with the body, going back to that time that I was living at Tassajara, and I was deciding about whether to stay or to go, and I talked to Leslie, and I also talked to James Barris on the phone. And as I did with Leslie, I explained the myriad pros and cons. I had clearly consulted with the advisor of the thinking mind quite a lot. But what I didn't realize was that I hadn't yet really listened to the body. So James did a little meditation with me, and he had me get quiet and go inside. And he said, let's just try on the first option. Okay, what's it, when we think of leaving Tassajara, what's that feel like in the body? So just see what happens. I kind of looked and just saw what happened, kind of like dropping a pebble in a lake or something. Just let it ripple through and then switch. What does it feel like to stay? And then let that ripple through. And as I did this, by the way, the instructions just to notice, is there one that's just a little more easeful? Is there one that's just a little more contracted? And if so, then that's the truth of that moment. It doesn't need to be the final decision, but that's the truth of that moment. Listening to what the body has to share. And sometimes it might not be clear. Sometimes it feels muddied. And when I did it at the time, I couldn't really decipher the difference. It was like, well, they both feel a little contracted. It's muddy. But as I did it over a few days, just here and there, when the thinking mind would start turning that question of what to do, I would just try this practice of just trying on each choice, entering the body, seeing what it felt like. And one day, when I was sitting in the Zendo, this storyline popped in. And I did this practice, and it was unbelievably clear. Suddenly, it was crystal clear to me, because when the thought of staying at Tassajara came in, the whole body relaxed. It was just like slipping into a warm bath in that moment. And when I thought of leaving, it felt tight and a little worried. And so there was a really clear communication from the body that wasn't available when I was just stuck in the ruminating mind. It was like, staying. So that was a really useful data point for me. That really helped clarify for me what I wanted to do. And this is, of course, one of the gifts of meditation. You know, it's like learning to tune an instrument. We learn how to listen to the body by feeling, right? And by feeling in the body what suffering feels like, you know, really learning what suffering feels like versus what joy feels like, we can begin to tune our instrument, right? We can begin to attune ourselves to where peace is. Like, oh, that decision actually doesn't feel very good. And I get all tight thinking about that. Or on the other hand, when I try on this other one, it also feels a little hard, but there's just a little more relaxation in the stomach and in the neck. So just feeling in. So that's one way we can learn to listen to the wisdom of the body. We train ourselves in feeling the body so we can lean into actions that are conducive to peace, and we can abstain from actions that aren't. Okay, so now, how do we learn to listen to the advisor of the heart? There's an old Cherokee story where a little boy goes to school, and while there, he sees one of the older kids start a fight with a younger student. At the end of the school day, it was clear that the tension wasn't over, and the little boy came home quite worried about what would transgress at school the next day between the two kids that were fighting. So the little boy goes home and he goes to his grandfather. He says, grandfather, there's going to be a fight at school tomorrow, and which child will win? And the grandfather calmly and slowly replied by saying, I have a fight like this within me too. There are two wolves in my heart. One is the wolf of greed, anger, and doubt. The other is the wolf of generosity, kindness, and wisdom. And they are also fighting. So the grandson thought about this for a minute, and then he asked his grandfather, grandfather, which wolf will win? And the grandfather replied, whichever one I feed. Whichever one I feed. In our own lives, whatever impulses we act on are the impulses we feed. If we act on anger and hostility, we feed that tendency in ourselves. If we act on generosity and kindness, we feed that tendency in ourselves. When faced with a decision, it can sometimes feel like there are two wolves fighting within us. So we might ask ourselves, are we motivated by love or by fear? Are we motivated by craving, aversion, and delusion, or by generosity, kindness, and wisdom? Learning to listen to the heart can mean learning to notice what motivates us. And as we listen to our heart and mind, one way that we can decipher whether this is the wolf of fear or the wolf of love is by checking in on what motivation is behind it. You know, what intention is fueling decision A, and what intention is fueling decision B? You know, am I feeding the pattern of craving, or am I feeding the pattern of generosity? Am I feeding the inner wolf of aversion, or am I feeding the inner wolf of patience? So what wolf will win? Whichever one you feed. So that's how we can listen to the advisor of the heart. Listen to our motivations. What are the intentions coming forth from the heart? Okay, so now the thinking mind. How do we listen to the thinking mind in a way where we're not hijacked by it? And there's a variety of ways, of course, to employ the wisdom of the thinking mind. And the first is to investigate the thoughts themselves. So this involves bringing some mindfulness to the thinking mind. When we find ourselves lost in thought about the situation at hand, instead of being totally lost in the content, can we actually step back a bit? Can we see what thoughts repeat, what stories we're telling ourselves? Almost as though we're looking in on a conversation across the room that other people are having. Like there's a group of people standing a ways away from us and we're watching them have a chat. In the same way, can we see our own thoughts like that? Not getting lost in the content, but observing the process. And doing this can allow us to learn what voices are speaking and what voices are guiding us. And sometimes, upon closer inspection, as we notice the thinking mind, we might realize that the voice we're hearing that's kind of playing on repeat for us might be the voice of a family member, maybe a demeaning mother or an overachieving uncle, or society's drive to be the best. So we might notice that our thoughts are conditioned. The way we speak to ourselves is sometimes a lot like the way that people have spoken to us. So see if you can notice the words that you're telling yourself, like, oh, I shouldn't even bother making new friends. No one will like me anyways. Well, maybe that's something a parent used to say. So truly learn to listen to who or what is directing you. Voices that you might be taking to be yourself that aren't actually you, that are not necessarily true. Another way to employ the thinking mind is by asking some questions. Maybe asking some questions about our choice. Is this an ethical choice? Put another way, does this cause harm to myself or others? Or is it conducive to well-being? That's a really great guide. The precepts are such a phenomenal advisor for us, such a phenomenal guide for us on this path. Another question you might ask yourself to see what's happening in the mind, to skillfully engage the thinking mind. You might ask ourselves, what am I afraid of? Am I acting on FOMO, fear of missing out? Or what am I afraid of? Or we might ask ourselves, what is my inmost request? What do I really want? What do I really want? Or we might ask ourselves, what supports my practice most? Which choice supports my practice most? For me, often I find myself, one common decision I make, and often at work, is determining when to give someone feedback, or when to, kind of interpersonally, when to speak and when not to speak. And we can ask ourselves, is it honest? What I want to say, is it honest? Is it kind? Is it timely? As opposed to, is it 2 a.m? Is it a normal time? Is it 3 minutes before our partner's running off to work? Is it a good time? And is it useful? Is it honest? Is it kind? And of course, kind doesn't need to mean that it necessarily feels good. Sometimes the kindest thing to say, it hurts. But it would be, as it's sometimes called, idiot compassion, as Pema Chodron calls it, idiot compassion, to not be honest, to say what's kind when it's not actually in the person's best interest. It actually would benefit from the feedback, then that's the kindest thing. So it's honest, kind, timely, and useful. It's also important to remember that you can very deliberately sit down and weigh your pros and cons intentionally. The mind is such a phenomenal tool. Use your logic. It's okay to think things through. Just because we have a practice where we're often letting go of thoughts doesn't mean that we want to banish the thinking mind. So those are some ways that you can wisely engage the thinking mind. And of course, I should probably mention that in Pali and in Sanskrit, the word chitta means heart-mind. So it's kind of a unified thing. So for the sake of this teaching, I parsed our advisors into body, emotion, and thought, and separating emotions and thinking. Of course, they're both totally interwoven. So you can expect that there's a lot of overlap between the heart and mind practices that I shared with you. So these are just a few ways that we can learn from our 3 wise advisors. We can listen to the body by feeling into what actions or choices feel most easeful and which feel more tense or stressful. Just tuning into the truth of this moment from a physical angle. We can learn to listen to the heart by tuning into our motivations, our intentions for acting, questioning which wolf will you feed. And we can listen to the thinking mind by being mindful of our thoughts, noticing which stories are playing and whether they're skillful. And then we can employ the mind to skillfully think through our situation to determine if the action is wholesome or if it will cause harm. And something I haven't mentioned is the importance of following up on our actions. Once you've listened and decided and then acted on that decision, take the time to reflect on how it went. Did the choice lead to suffering, or did it lead to happiness? And then let that inform your next choice. The Buddha had a really strong emphasis. A lot of people think that he was really only about intention. He actually had a really strong focus on result and reflection on one's previous activity. So make sure to reflect on how it went. And remember that throughout the whole process, see if you can find a resting place even when you don't have the answer. That peace is possible in the midst of uncertainty. And that we can, by being in the body, we can find a refuge when we truly just don't know. I'd like to close with one of my favorite poems about making a choice. And this is by Jane Hirshfield, a woman who actually lived at Tassajara for a few years when she was young. It's called Tree, and it goes like this. It is foolish to let a young redwood grow next to It is foolish to let a young redwood grow next to a house. Even in this one lifetime, you will have to choose. That great calm being, this clutter of soup pots and books. Already the first branch tips brush at the window, softly, calmly. Immensity taps at your life. So let's just sit for a moment together. Even in this one lifetime, you will have to choose. This great calm being, this clutter of soup pots and books. Already the first branch tips brush at the window. Softly, calmly, immensity taps at your life. Thanks so much, everyone, for your very kind attention.